Welcome to TESO Consulting Group's DEI podcast series, Why Is It So Hard? Shining Through the Shadow of Resistance. I'm Dr. Tonya Breland.
And I am Erika Kelley.
Welcome back. I am Dr. Tonya Breland.
And I'm Erika Kelley. And this is our podcast series, Why Is It So Hard? Shining Through the Shadows of Resistance. In this podcast series, we discuss issues that prevent us from being socially just and free. And the goal here is to disrupt racial inequality and inequity in systems, the kinds of things we don't even see anymore. So what we challenge ourselves to do is to be the change we want to see. We've heard that a lot, but here we're really trying to live that. Our new series is called Justice for All.
And today we have a special guest with us.
Yes, we do.
Erika Kelley is our guest, and Erika is going to be talking to us about justice and mental health, which is really an issue that we see a lot about and hear a lot about. I have to say it has become much more prevalent in the news and in social media, especially since the pandemic.
Absolutely.
And so, social justice, and mental health, they kind of go hand in hand, but in ways that most people might not think about it.
Right.
And it's really about where there is access or where there might not be access, and where there are inequities or where are there equities within the system. And so we have Erika with us, and I'm going to let our Erika introduce our guest, Erika, and tell you a little bit more about her as we get started in this conversation.
Yes. Well, Erika and I go way back. We worked at a state agency together. And Erika her experience spans, state and local environments and organizations. And now she's working in the nonprofit space, and she's just doing some work. And what I love about, I heard this term a few months ago in terms of following the joy. And what Erika does, and I'll let her talk a little bit more about, the work that she does and her areas and her passion in terms of her work. But what I really appreciate is that she has found something that she can truly follow the joy and her expertise.
Yes.
So Erika, I'm going to ask you to just talk a little bit about your work in the mental health space, particularly as it pertains to justice.
Absolutely. Well, first, thank you both for just allowing me to be here and for us to be able to just have this space. I think when we talk about access, one of the things I always think about is just awareness and education. And so I think just by having these conversations, we are doing our part to be able to contribute to mental health equity. And so my career trajectory and my lifelong passion has always been to advance social justice by creating pathways to collective healing from trauma. And what that essentially means is, how can we look at three buckets? And so look at ourselves and how can we be introspective to help with our own personal healing. And then that touches our families, our workspaces, our friends, and how we can impact and influence those around us, and also encourage them to actually be able to look at their own mental health and be introspective. And so that's how we get to the collective healing. But then the other part that I don't think that's addressed often enough is how can we impact the system? And so all three are intertwined, and all three influence one another: the individual, the collective, and the system. And so what I do through my organization, Sage Horizons, which is the entrepreneurial piece, and then the sister to Sage Horizons is our nonprofit, which is Soaring. And we use research, practice, including healing-centered writing and poetry, combined with lived experiences and empathy that is so important to be able to build the capacity of the workforce. So we train and coach leaders to be able to lead inclusively and equitably, and also to be able to provide effective and sensitive care to the teams that they lead in the communities that they serve. And then again, that final piece, looking at the system, how can we address systemic and policy inequities, again, to ensure that our communities, schools, workplaces, and home environments are safe and supportive?
Wow, that's really good.
Yeah.
You're doing some really important work, and when I think about what we continue to see, in the news and in social media, related to mental health, we also know that not everyone has access
Yeah.
to it, or there may be barriers that are in place. Can you talk a little bit about what you've seen in your experience, and even ways that you might even recommend that those barriers be removed? Can you talk a little bit about that?
I think you hit the nail on the head when you said access. So when we think about access, there are historically marginalized and minoritized populations that don't have access to things like insurance. We don't have access to quality treatment. We don't have access to medication. And there are some factors that contribute to lack of access. And when we think about disparities, and sometimes it's income, mobility, and
Mhm.
again, when we think about income, depending on where you live, if you live in a rural area and you don't have transportation, that is directly correlates with your mobility. Also, our work schedules. There are a lot of mental health providers that do, have extended office hours, but there are some families that are working multiple jobs. So when we think about being able to get to the mental health provider, and how does that uh, translate with our work schedules, that can also be an issue. Lack of childcare. And even when we think about families now, we may have extended family members. So you might be a grandparent that might want to, get to your mental health provider, but you can't because you're helping your child, raise the children. So of course there's the lack of childcare. And then I think there's the stigma in a lot of just different cultures. And I think sometimes it even expands past cultures. If you think about what's shown on TV and Hollywood, how we're so quick to call women crazy, to call anyone crazy. And so there's the stigma. There's a stigma. If you need medication, you're on medication for that. Back in the day, we didn't we didn't take medication. Um, and so there's a stigma behind that. And then there's again that structural racism, institutional racism, that again can be a little bit uncomfortable to talk about.
We talk about it all the time, so feel free.
But that is real. And when we think about the systems that we have in place, how quickly we're able to, I think, misclassify a lot of our students in education. And I think, again, not being culturally responsive, and just the first thing you want to say is, oh, they might be special needs. They're special education. And I think, again, not thinking about, well, what happened to them or what's going on in their lives that could be perhaps contributing to their behavior. And then there's language. Sometimes it doesn't even have anything to do with mental health. It's just there could be a language barrier. And so the children can be acting out because they just can't communicate, and the teachers can't communicate with them. So again, there's the just misdiagnosis. And again, I think that goes to just the those structural pieces that, again, all those things kind of impact our where we are in terms of our mental health today.
Yeah. Erika, you talked about stigma, and I think that's huge, right? But at the beginning, when Tonya was introducing, this episode, she said and I agree, like we hear more about it, we talk more about it now. Do you think that that's done anything to combat stigma? Because we see it on social media. We even see commercials about different medications. Like when I was a little girl, you didn't see that on TV.
No, not at all.
You even hear about it sometimes in church. Like some churches, like we never talked about that in
not.
church when I was
Just
a kid.
need Jesus.
That's right. That's it. That's it. Just pray about it, right? So, do you think that that has done anything to combat the stigma around, mental health, or do you think it's contributed to it?
I think it has impacted it, and I think in a positive way. But I think often there's a lot of band-aids, and so yes, we can take medication, and that can help me with my anxiety. But I think what's missing is going beneath the surface and finding out what is causing that anxiety. And I think the way to get to that is through emotional processing. And those can be very, very difficult, painful, hard conversations that need to be had. But I think, how can we get to the root of what's causing my anxiety, what's causing my anger, versus so quickly giving medication that's going to alter my behavior. Now, I do think that there are sometimes it could be something neurologically, something with your brain that you may need medication to impact that. But again, I think it just needs to be a step back and having those conversations. And in terms of contributing and combating that stigma, I don't even think it always has to be formalized therapy or cognitive behavior therapy or getting to the therapist. I just think having those difficult conversations with our loved ones and being able to be aware and acknowledging that so much of what we're experiencing goes back to our childhood. And so sometimes it's just being seen, just being heard. A lot of us are upset with our parents because we feel we may not have gotten the emotional support that we needed. But depending on your background, and I'll speak for myself personally, there was poverty. We were in survival mode. So, me worrying about crying, it's almost like, I can't worry about your little feelings. We worried about where's the next meal coming from. But then, you grow up and now you're having these different behaviors because there was some emotional neglect. So with your friends, your partner, you might be clingy, but there are reasons for that. And so again, I'll use myself and my own lived experiences, which I think have helped a lot of other people, and just being able to talk about that and being able to look at my caregivers with more compassion now, and realizing that they did the best they can with where the capacity of were. And so that helped me to, forgive my caregivers, and also look at them more holistically as a person, and not always honing in on the lack part, and realizing that she instilled some amazing things in me, a nurturer, loyal. But again, just having those difficult conversations and processing that. And I think that, to me, has been, I think that's going to be the changing factor. I think it's just beyond medication.
Sure.
Thank you for your transparency, just sharing a little bit of your own situation. And I think what I heard as you were talking, I heard the personal side to this, that, we often will kind of have like a sterilized conversation about mental health. And, quite honestly, it's something that really impacts our lives in a major way. The way that we see the world, the way that we show up in the world, all of that, has a major impact on, what has happened in our past, for example. Our families of origin have a major impact on, how we show up in this world. And I just really appreciate how you just kind of, brought this conversation around to being more personal when you think about, young people out there, because we know that there's also a lot of trauma that our young people have experienced. There's racial trauma that still hasn't gone away, that is very much a part of many of our experiences. Eric and I have talked about that in the past. But when you think about what our young people are facing as it relates to mental health, their mental health. What would you say some of the biggest concerns are, and even ways that society and systems can support our young people?
Again, I think it goes back to communication and expression. And I think the key is being able to maintain a regulated nervous system. And there's just so many things in our society. And I just love that we're having these conversations about colonization and decolonization. But again, I'll speak for myself personally. I sometimes find myself just getting sad, and then I find myself getting angry. And so I just have to process those feelings. I'm a mother to three boys, and so it was so interesting when they were younger and having friends that had daughters versus sons, and always hearing, "Oh, boys are so much easier. Boys are so much easier." But I'll have to say, my stress level is just so different in ways that's different from my friends that have daughters, and having to have those difficult conversations about them now that they're driving. I have two 18-year-olds, and I even remember my son when he was about 15, and again, he exercising his independence, and he didn't understand why he couldn't come back in at 8 o'clock. And he said, "Mom, I'm just playing basketball." And I said, "You cannot be on the streets just at a basketball court by yourself playing basketball." And that was one of those situations where he just couldn't see it. And even though I tried to explain to him about the police, and that was one where I just said, "Look, you're just gonna have to be upset with me. As you get older, you will understand, but you cannot. If you want to find a Y that you want to go to, YMCA or someplace where you're indoors with other people, but I need you in before it gets dark."
Sure.
So that was a level of stress. And even as I talk about it, it's a level of stress and anxiety. And I hear so many times about our Black boys. And so again, just thinking about, I think what young people can do is just processing that anger that they might be feeling, and hearing more about what happened to Black and brown populations, just in terms of colonization. I mean, it was some really painful things that happened, to our ancestors. And so again, just processing that and having a space to be able to do that. And again, through Sage Horizons and Soaring Phoenix, we don't just highlight the expression through verbal, but through writing. There's research that shows that being able, if you write for an extended period of time, how that helps with emotional processing. So just recognizing that there's things that we can do personally, and not always looking externally to be able to keep our nervous systems regulated. And again, going back to my sons, I tell them, you really have to be mindful of the way you express your anger, because we don't get the grace that a lot of other populations and races get. You just cannot, you can't all this popping off and throwing stuff, stuff. Again, I've even been in the workplace and I've seen, different races throwing stuff and knocking stuff off their desk. And I just thought, if I did that, they would have me in handcuffs. Like, I don't get the
That's
grace
right.
to do that. So,
Right.
learning how to take that deep breath, and again, not not lose your cool.
Right.
Yeah, Erica, I love that because I often think about how the frustration that my father felt from being, having suffered indignities or discrimination was definitely passed down to us. I mean, my father, would just sort of impart extreme amounts of caution, and we would get anxious about it, and we would get really nervous. And so I love sort of, like some of the strategies that you shared, the writing and the breathing. But would you say that there needs to be balance between caution and anxiety, or caution and nervousness, and like where would you say that is? Because I think we've all had these conversations. I think particularly marginalized communities, but especially I think African Americans in this country, we've had these conversations with our kids. Like there are certain things that you just can't do.
Right.
And in this generation, I feel like there's so much more like, well, why can't I? Those kinds of things. I wonder kind of about that. Like, where do you see that line?
And, Eric and Tonya, that's just so important and so key. And again, me personally, I'm thankful for creating an environment with my children where I'm okay with getting feedback from them. And there have been times when they know how to use their words. I think you're a little triggered. It's going to be okay. And so they've had to put me in check and just say, you've instilled these things in us. We know how to carry ourselves respectfully. We're not going to put ourselves in situations that could be compromising or, again, being by yourself after hours. So I think it's one of those things, once you have those things in place, you have to let it go. And I remind myself all the time, like, okay, they've done, their due diligence. You have to let it go. And I rely on my faith, trust God. And I also rely on statistics. And so I share this with folks that suffer from anxiety. If you look at the outcomes, like a spectrum from A to Z, to be honest, the likelihood that the worst outcome, which would be Z, the likelihood is that that's not going to happen. So just move the dial somewhere between letter O, and that's probably a little bit more realistic. And so again, I can go from, oh no, it's getting dark, the cops are going to pull him over and kill him. No, Erica, let's take it back. You went from A to Z, and now you're driving yourself crazy. Just bring it back, because statistically, that's really just not likely. And so I think, again, thinking of ways that we can internally manage our anxiety, and not taking that caution to quite honestly panic and paranoia. That's not helpful.
That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot, especially when you're a parent, you do worry about the well-being. And when you're a Black parent, and when you're a Black parent that has boys, and I know you still have concerns even with the girls, but there is something that, in our society, that there's this kind of shared trauma that we have that just, it's scary. And I know that, school systems are doing more than they had in the past. Maybe other organizations are doing more as well. Erika, if you had an opportunity to testify in front of state Congress and give recommendations for the kinds of policies that should come forth to really hone in on supporting our, Black and brown kids, in the school system, what would you say to that, Congress, if you will?
I think I would first say that we need to look at our almost an organizational assessment. So wherever there's organizations that are serving children, families, to make sure that it's trauma informed. And that just essentially means make sure it's safe, make sure it's a place where I feel safe coming to work. I feel safe coming to school. And I think when you take that basic principle, then you can go within the layers and start thinking, well, what does it mean to be safe? That means uh, not feeling as though I'm going to get ridiculed because of my race, my religion, my sexual orientation. And I think once you do that, then you can just continue to go peel back the layers. And so that means having conversations about diversity. And again, diversity covers so many things: race, culture, sexual orientation. And I think that lends to the culturally responsive piece. And I think that it is a responsibility for our leaders that are touching these different populations to be educated in these different areas. And I also think taking diversity seriously and looking at how we essentially need a diverse workforce. Mm-hmm. And there's, again, research that shows if I have a similar background with similar lived experiences, that I can just connect with certain populations in a way that others can't. And again, there's nothing wrong with having a teacher or a peer or someone that doesn't look like you. But I think, again, just affording those the opportunity to be able to connect with those that look like them, because again, it's the expertise, the lived experiences, and the empathy, I think, that makes up for, I think, which is often at the root of a lot of our pain, is the connection. And even when we think about mental health providers, and if you are getting formal therapy, if you're talking about issues like racism, and they just can't understand because they just don't understand. I'm not going to fault them, but expecting them to be able to help you process that sometimes, or even strategies on how to live in this environment, there's just often a disconnect. Mm-hmm. So I would say, again, how can we make sure that our environments are safe? And then thinking about what that means and peeling back all the layers in that way.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We often, as we sort of wind down our really wonderful conversation, we often think a lot about kind of long-term consequences of not addressing, an issue such as mental health, like if we continue to not address. But I'd like to dream for just a second. So what do you think? You talked about connection. You talked about people making connections with each other. When we have representation, accurate representation. Could you just sort of paint a picture for us of what are the long-term consequences of fully and comprehensively addressing the mental health needs that, we have, particularly with our young people? What happens when we see this done well?
Mm-hmm. I think when we see this done well, I think that the relationships that we have with people and the way that we resolve conflict, I think it just makes for a harmonious environment. And that means at home, in the workplace, with your partner, with your children. Again, I think when it's done well, those are the things that matter. And as these young people grow up to be leaders and managers, just remembering just that ripple, how every person that we touch, how that can just how much influence that we have. And so I think that's first. And then I think also just combating this generational and intergenerational trauma. I talk to my boys, my young men, all the time, and I tell them, look, it stops here. We're not doing this. Mm-hmm. When I ask you, how do you feel about this or this situation, saying I don't know is unacceptable. That is not going to fly. And so, pulling out that list of adjectives, go through these words, and I need you to, let's just talk about it. But again, I created that environment that's safe for them to do that. So I think for young people, realizing that it starts with them, go home and love your parents, love your siblings, love your friends, and just realize that our own self-healing truly does contribute to the collective healing.
You've given us so much to think about. And you said it, you ended it really well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Erika, because we're gonna take some time to even think more about this, but we're really happy that you were able to just share your perspective, share your own lived experiences with us and with our audience. And we hope that the nuggets that we were able to take away will be impactful for what we do when we're interacting with our families and our community, and also all of you, who are watching. We hope that you were able to take something away from this conversation that you can use, that you can think about, that you could push organizations to do more and to do better for our young people, for the workplace. All of that's really important for us to have a healthy society and for us to have justice in our society. So again, Erika, thank you so much.
Thank you, Erika,
for showing up today and for just sharing you with us. And again, I am Dr. Tonya Breland.
And I'm Erika Leek. And again, we thank Erika Kelley for being with us today. Have a great day, everybody, and thank you for joining us.